Do you have employees that used to be great, but now seem like they don't care? Do you have employees that were on the right track and maybe have fallen off that track? In the biz, we call those disengaged employees. And today we're going to talk about, are they disengaged because of you? Is it your fault? Welcome to episode 31 of the KeyHire Small Business Podcast, where we cover the issues that help owners scale their small business. I'm Corey Harlock, creator of KeyHire Solutions, where we grow Texas business with our talent, and I'll be your host. Our guest today is Dr. Benjamin Ritter. He's a leadership executive and career coach, and he's also the author of Becoming Fearless, 65 Strategies to Journey from Self-Doubt to Self-Mastery. Ben, we got to work on the title. I can hardly say it. He's a couple fun facts about Ben. He recently became an executive coach for the CDC through some speaking events, which is very cool. And he's coached over 500 executives one-on-one, so he knows what he's talking about. He also has a turtle that's just turning 21, and in his words, he's going to be old enough to drink now, and I guess they're throwing a big party for him. So I can't wait to find out about this turtle. Matt, let's bring Ben on.
Hey, so supposedly if someone has a hard time saying a title or a name, it's more memorable. I just made that quote up, but we'll see. We'll see if it works.
It's the power of positive reinforcement. No, don't worry. Yeah. I'm just not that articulate, and my enunciation needs some work.
No, and the turtle, by the way, we thought maybe give him a little shot of mezcal in the turtle tank, but we voted it out just because we don't think it would be very smart.
I bet you'd eat the worm though if you dropped it in there.
I do have the worms are fun. We go in the backyard and pull out some worms from the ground after every rain, and he gets a good treat.
Cool. What's burning question? What's the name of this turtle?
Okay, so his name that we call him in person, like you call me Ben, right, is Squirt. But his official name is Donatello. So whenever he has to sign documents, he has to sign Donatello. He got angry at us because it takes a long time for him to write. But very Squirt's cool. Easy. He just kind of spits some water on the paper.
Gotcha. Cool. So you've been doing your company, and I never mentioned the name of your company, but it's called help me out.
Live for Yourself Consulting, or if we're in some sort of formal or professional environment, LFY Consulting, because Live for Yourself Consulting is a little touchy for some people.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So you've been doing this a while, and I remember when we were talking about having you on, we were kind of pitching topics back and forth, and we got on this thing about disengaged employees, which it's a hot button issue because you want your employees to be you want them profitable, right? You need them to be engaged. You need them to be working. You need them to be giving you the right amount of output. So let's start. We always start with the what is it question. So in your world and the way you work through this, how do you define a disengaged employee?
So a disengaged employee is basically someone that has disengaged from the work. What that really means is, it's kind of different for each specific employee, but generally They are not involved as much as they used to be. They're not involved. It also starts to decrease. Their levels of absenteeism tend to also increase. So basically they start kind of not really showing up anymore.
Right.
They might just do exactly what they need to get done. Doesn't mean that they're underperforming unless they're actively disengaged. And then again, that's even worse, because that's someone that's actually costing the company money by how they're utilizing company resources. But generally, a disengaged employee is someone that doesn't really feel as loyal or bought in to the company itself, doesn't feel that their job is exactly meaningful. They don't invest heavily in relationships in the organization, and ultimately they are just biding their time.
All right. And then, so you touched on it, but maybe we should talk about some warning signs as an employer that this person may be, in the biz, we like to say they've quit, but you're still paying them. They just haven't told you. They haven't given you 2 weeks, but they're in their mind, they've quit. So what are some of the warning signs you might look for as an employer if that someone may be disengaged or checked out?
It's very important for leaders to know what the baseline is for each one of their employees. That means that you should be having regular one-on-ones, you should be in regular communication, you should be asking them some general feedback or how are you doing questions, because a disengaged employee is someone that kind of alters their behavior to be less than where they were, and generally it keeps getting worse over time. So oftentimes their level of work productivity decreases. I mentioned that. They tend to do the most minimum amount of effort possible when it comes to the job itself. They, instead of becoming a champion of change in the organization, or maybe they have like an optimistic or growth mindset, or generally they're open to ideas. They tend to close off. They tend to give less to conversations and be more negative.
Right.
That builds into showing less enthusiasm or passion for the work. And then they stop showing up. So maybe they don't come to the meeting. Maybe they cancel the one-on-one. Maybe they take more time off. Maybe all of a sudden their calendar that used to be visible is now not visible. And one of the, greatest signs too is just they stop communicating in the extras. So if you're using Teams, chats about how's your week going or how's your weekend. I actually remember once, because I worked internal for organizations too. We had one employee, one coworker, has never replied to any message on Teams. The only way to get a hold of them was to email, and then maybe it took a couple days. This person checked out. You could tell they were checked out, and the fact that the company allowed this type of behavior to continue was mind-boggling. Ended up finding out that the employee moved, lived in a completely different country than they said they did, and had another job. And so to ignore some really simple signs of disengagement, which are your overall connection to the work has decreased by, I can say, over 20%, right? For a prolonged period of time. Because sometimes something happens in the family, something happens in their life personally, maybe they're worried about money, whatever it is, maybe they got sick. But for a longer period of time, that person's level of engagement, motivation, or commitment to the job changed. You got to do something about it as a leader.
I feel like we might need to further define maybe a distinction between disengagement because of lack of fulfillment, something to do with the work, the job, the environment, the coworkers, and disengagement due to personal dilemma, tragedy. Because we've talked before on the show about my employee needs help, what do I do? And how to kind of deal with that. Maybe they're going through a divorce, or they have an addiction that's reared its ugly head, or they've lost a loved one, or their kids are gotten into all kinds of trouble, and they're kind of, their mind is, well, obviously you're always going to gravitate to the family, in most cases anyway, to take care of those. So two questions for you. Do you think that that's a meaningful distinction? And B, can we talk about the disengagement kind of from the work environment, people, fulfillment side? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there are going to be some defining moments in conversations with this employee that help you understand if the issue is personal, like something's happening in my life, I'm still committed to the organization, or something is just they're not vibing within the organization and the job itself.
Right.
And so the negativity and and deciding to champion change or be a positive kind of icon with a role model even within the team, like that will go completely away if it is a disconnect between the company's goals, values, or mission overall.
Right. Yeah.
So, and a person also that reduces productivity based on personal issues, they generally also will comment on that. They'll say, I know I haven't really been showing up as much lately. I feel terrible about it. You will never hear that from a disengaged employee. A disengaged employee tries to not bring any attention whatsoever to their lack of engagement. And so there's a sense of personal accountability that is there with someone that cares about the company still because they're worried about their job. And then a lack of personal accountability from the person that's actually disengaged because they don't care about the company. And these people might even be vocal. The problem is a truly disengaged employee, someone that's actively disengaged, is trying to hide the fact that they are, but doesn't care enough to overperform. So oftentimes they're not being incredibly vocal about their disagreement or their negativity about the company because they don't want to draw attention to it. So some leaders actually get confused. They're like, oh, this person is just complaining about everything. Well, that's generally also because it could be because they really care about what the organization stands for or why they're there, less than them just being against the company and being negative. So you have to be very careful about kind of like what is this person's real intent? Are they just being negative and critical because they disengaged from me? They don't believe in me, that I don't have credibility in their eyes. The organization isn't a place for them to grow their career, or because they actually want to implement positive change and they do care what the organization stands for.
Yeah, Eben Pagan calls those people black box builders. All they're trying to do, they're not spending their energy helping your business. They're spending all their energies creating as much job security for themselves as they can by kind of like pointing out fires and creating fires and complicating their role to the point where if you go up to them and say, hey, what do you do? And they explain it to you and you have more questions than answers, then usually you walk away saying, thank God you're here because I have no idea what you're doing. That's a black box builder.
Yeah, and so they are, and you have to be careful because they may or may not be disengaged. They may just be operating from a place of fear and a desire to be safe within their job. But oftentimes they're not adding as much value to the company as possible. So now kind of pulling in some other traits and factors here. But in general, just to say, disengaged, and so it's difficult to tell someone's disengaged if they start off disengaged. But oftentimes that's not what happens. An employee actually cares about a company, or they go through a honeymoon phase of being in a role, or maybe they've been in a company for 2-3 years. Maybe they've been in there for 10 years and they're really loyal, but then they get some feedback or an event occurs that makes them frustrated, angry at the company, at the leader, or maybe something happens with a peer, or maybe something was promised to them and it doesn't happen, like they were going to get a promotion and they don't. And then that person goes, why do I care so much again? And then they start pulling back, and that's when they start looking generally for a way out, or they're biding their time because it's kind of like that. I think there was a big newspaper headline thing about quiet quitting, right? Quiet quitting is just an employee saying like, I'm not going to overperform for a company that I don't feel deserves it. And so if you have an employee that's disengaged, generally what you're noticing is that person you could say is displaying behaviors where they've checked out. And I know we're not in kind of like, well, what do you do about this? But anything that is different from how someone acted before to how they're how they're acting now, they've pulled back energy from the company and have not tried to explain it, that person generally is disengaging.
Okay, so then we move into the next. So what are the mistakes? And man, this could be a 10-part topic because there's so much here. There's what mistakes do we make? We could talk about what we as leaders might do to push them towards this. We could also talk about if we see someone who we feel is pulling back, how can we deal with them? I think we should talk about if we see someone pulling back, how can we deal with them? A whole other thing on how we can steal motivation from our employees. That's a whole other show. Maybe we'll have you back to do that one. But let's talk about, we see someone, Corey used to be really great, and last couple months, man, he seems checked out. So what are the mistakes you see business owner make when it comes to dealing with these people?
Well, over the past couple of months, Corey seems checked out. I don't know what's going on. I think that's the first mistake. You've let a couple months go by.
Fair enough.
And I think when you notice that something is wrong with someone, you cannot wait. Now, first, before an action or before a conversation, ask yourself, has something happened within that person's life that I know of or in the company that could have caused this? So oftentimes, any sort of performance review causes a temporary dip in engagement levels. The person's not becoming disengaged. They're just processing the fact that they received information that surprised them or that they were unhappy about. And that can happen that can take into account anything where that has surprised someone that they're unhappy about within an organization. Like a lot of leaders are frustrated with levels of engagement when a company goes through a round of layoffs. Well, that's expected. Or when their leader changes, or when someone they care about, gets let go, or when they receive negative or constructive feedback to help them grow. Generally, those create dips in engagement levels. So you have to ask yourself, did something happen where this person, like this makes sense? Okay, so if that's the case, then you might want to provide additional support and resources and try to build back trust, but you don't really have to have like a "are you okay" conversation yet. But if you do notice something is dipping and it's not in response to a specific event, because if it was an event, you have to give that person some grace to get back to normal and just lead with trust and positivity. But if it is something that has occurred without any sort of correlation, then you truly do have to confront that situation as immediate as possible. So the first mistake is just letting it go and not going in and actually having a conversation with the employee. And that can be as simple as, "Are you okay?" Or be more specific around when you give feedback. You want to talk about a specific situation and talk about the impact of that situation. So, hey, hey, Corey, over the past week, I haven't seen you join any of our regular team meetings or kind of our corporate report outs. Generally in the past, you've been pretty engaged and your insight's been really valuable. And what's going on? And just have that conversation with them. And they might say, "Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's okay." Well, ask three more times, like really dive into a little bit. You can even self share. You can connect it to their career development goals in terms of what they're trying to achieve and how this behavior is going to impact that. But don't let them off the hook, because generally they're just going to say, "I'm fine." Just like whenever you ask anybody, "How's your day?" And they're like, "It's great."
Yeah.
A disengaged employee, the last thing they want to do is tell you that they're disengaged. So you have to give them the space to share. I'll give them the time to share, and also have to make sure that you're asking enough questions for that even to happen.
But Dr. Benjamin, some people's strategy is wait and see. Let's just wait and see. Wait and see what happens here. They'll be fine. They're going to come around. Let's wait and see. How do you feel about that strategy?
Well, generally that also occurs because people that disengage tend to also be high performers that get disappointed. And so a leader ends up giving that high performer a ton more work than anybody else on the team. They don't give them feedback because they think that person's okay. They give them full autonomy in terms of making decisions. Little do they know that employee is like complaining when they get home. "My boss never tells me what to do. My boss never gives me feedback. My boss gives me all this work," to the point where then they get a review where they don't get promoted or they don't get recognition. And so they pull back and they disengage. And that boss never knew that something was wrong because they trusted their employee to let them know or to be okay. An employee's job, even though I think employees need to be more accountable for their own levels of job satisfaction and their career growth, a manager can never assume that an employee is going to tell them things that they need to know, like around their own levels of engagement or happiness, etc. You have to always say, "If I don't ask the question, I'm not going to get the information." And so we have to take responsibility as a manager to say, my job is not to be directly responsible for the outcomes. My job is to create an environment that's curated toward each of my employees to help them succeed. So my job is to constantly check in with them. And my job is, if they're not performing or not succeeding, I need to immediately check in with them because I'm not doing something that employee needs. As their leader, I have not, for some reason, supplied them with some sort of resource or support.
It's funny because I remember reading a case
And
study.
It's simple, by the way. Yeah.
It is and it's not, because a lot of business owners, and I say this all the time, these are hardworking people doing the best they can. And sometimes it can feel like one more thing I have to do. And it's a hard thing. Going up to someone who's been with you a while who isn't performing, the hardest thing to do for them is not take it personal. And the second hardest thing for them to do is push it aside and go have an open, honest conversation where they're creating a trusting and comfortable environment, because in their own way, they feel hurt because they feel like they're doing something to them. Not always, but sometimes. There's a case study where one of the highest performing people in the company quit. and it was right before review time. And when they gave their notice, the manager looked at them and said, "You can't do this. We're just getting ready to promote you. You're our best person." And the employee said, "No one has ever told me that. I thought I was doing a bad job. And that's why I'm leaving, because I thought with this review, I was actually going to get terminated." And that's how big that disconnect can get, because in absence of information, we create our own story, and no one ever creates a hero story. They always create a worst case scenario.
The highest achieving professionals I've worked with have almost 100% of them have told me that they can't ask their manager for feedback, or they can't ask their manager for time to meet because their manager is too busy. And they might have a really positive relationship.
Yep.
And so you have these incredible employees working that are not getting the support that they need. And so then you think about the disengaged employees that they've given up. They're not going to ask for a one-on-one. They're not going to ask for more feedback when you're not getting it. They're not going to ask for recognition. They're not going to share that they don't feel supported. And so your job as a manager, and you mentioned it's like, oh, one more thing to do. I would totally challenge any manager with that idea or that response and say your only job as a manager, at least the majority of your position, is to be able to create open dialogue with your employees about what they want to do for their career, about the work that they enjoy, about the questions and problems that they're facing. That's it. And to give them feedback about how they're performing. And when you move into leadership, your job is less about doing the work and all the widgets, and it's more so to support your team to go reach their goals. And that requires that you have those one-on-one meetings. You aren't defensive about the feedback that you get. If they are disengaged and they want to complain to you, then your job is not to defend. Just like if you gave them feedback, you don't want them to sit there and defend. You want them to accept the feedback and then commit to some new behavior. That's your job as a manager as well. And then to provide them opportunities that can help support them to reach their goals. And at the same time, to trust them to be able to do it, but after those conversations, not just to trust them to do things without those conversations, because that won't work. And then if they are disengaged and they don't really understand, because it happens a lot, they don't have role clarity, they don't know what they're expected to achieve, they don't know how their impact impacts the broader organization, is to define that why for them and to let them have a broader perspective on the organization's meaning, right, or vision or values, and how they play a role in that to help give them some of that as well. It's not to attend meetings. It's not to provide report outs to your boss. It's not to do the work yourself. It's to be the manager and leader that your team needs to be successful, and to intervene in moments like this where people might be disengaged.
You've made a really good distinction, because a lot of the people that are listening might be a business owner where they're at that crux in their business where they're kind of sitting in every seat in the company, every leadership seat in the company, and they're working with the people they have to push forward and get through. And when I made the comment, they might be thinking, it's one more thing I have to do. I'm already working 60 hours a week and missing dinner with the kids and wife and now, or husband, and now I got to go talk to someone about their problems. I have a lot of my own. How might they navigate that?
Well, if we're talking about, let's say, a business owner or an executive, by the way, the CEOs of companies that I've worked with, they want performance development processes throughout their entire organizations. They want one-on-ones, they want quarterly feedback, they want all those reviews, but they don't have one-on-ones with their senior leadership team. It's kind of like mind-boggling.
I think
that
that's
happens.
Pretty consistent throughout any business.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's this level of trust. Oh, I hired them. They're experienced enough. They don't need my support. No, they need your support even more. They're not the CEO of the company. If they wanted to be the CEO of a company, they'd go be a CEO of a company. And they're working for you, and so expect the same level of leadership attention. And so if you're a business owner saying, I can't believe I have to talk to my employees, then I would ask you if you want to be a business owner, or if you want to be someone that is a silent investor on the side and hire someone to go do that.
Right.
Now you're still going to have to go meet that person to provide that one person to provide direction and coaching. But it's until you can start hiring computers to do the high level strategic or other work that you need, you're going to have to treat people like they're humans.
Yeah. And what about promoting the problem? Have you ever run into that? Where, oh, they're a little unmotivated, but I know what'll help them out if we give them more responsibility and a raise and a new title.
So I facilitate a lot of emerging leader programs as well. And they're 6 months or 12 months, some reason 16 months. And a part of the process of developing those programs or selecting people to go into them is also for retention, to say, oh, we put them in this program for 16 months. They're not going anywhere for a year and a half because it's going to look good on their resume if they have this credential. So there is something to be said about if I promote this person, they're generally going to be here for 3, 6, or 12 months, because no one wants to leave a new position if they're doing it for 2 months. They don't want to show that on their resume. So it is a retention tool. It is not an engagement tool. So you can have negative retention. You can have positive turnover. And so if someone, and let's taking a step back for a second, if a disengaged employee is meeting the requirements of their role and doing their job and they're not being negative to other people around them, is that so bad? From a retention standpoint, maybe. From a potential standpoint, maybe. But oftentimes a disengaged employee might still be beneficial to a company if you're not looking to have like these major high achievers within your business. You just might not have as much loyalty. It becomes an issue when they start becoming negative. They start doing things on company time or stealing sometimes because they become so disengaged that it becomes resentment. So that's what we're trying to do, is like we're trying to interrupt this engagement from becoming something even worse and becoming a bigger cost to the company overall. So you don't want to promote someone that's disengaged unless they're disengaged because they wanted a promotion. So it's kind of like you have to spend the time as a leader to have a conversation with this employee to understand why they've been pulling back. Yeah. And a promotion without any sort of leadership or management support is still going to lead to a disengaged employee, because who's going to be their leader now? And you're kind of giving them someone that is already distrustful and negative about the organization. They just still don't have that connection. The meaning that's important for them to be productive and back at the higher level that that they're capable of.
Well, I think that's a good way to segue into the what can we do. So if you were to sit down with a business owner who's saying, man, I have someone who used to be my go-to and they just haven't been performing, I think they're checked out. What are the top 2, 3, 5 pieces of advice, other than calling you, Dr. Benjamin, what would you recommend that they do today? They could take back to their business today and start doing to understand where people are and figuring out what direction they need to go to resolve the issue.
So generally when people come to me about this issue, they haven't actually spent the time researching it. So they think someone's disengaged, but they don't actually know someone's disengaged. So I would highly recommend that every leader go back, and if, let's say they think that Ben is a disengaged employee, or let's say John's a disengaged employee in the workforce, we'll sit down and start taking some notes on how John used to act, how John's acting now, and see what sort of events have occurred in the process. Just to get some more research. If possible, you can even talk to some of John's coworkers, get a little bit more information, being careful not to portray to John that John's in trouble in any way, shape, or form, but just collate some information so you're not just basing your opinion off of imaginary ideas. And then once you actually feel like, okay, something did happen, maybe you found that you didn't follow up on something, you maybe have broken John's trust in some way, or John didn't get a promotion that they really wanted, it's to go, and even before having the conversation around are you disengaged or engaged, is to apologize or to take responsibility and to have a conversation with John about that situation again, to see if you can plan for something in the future. Let's say, for example, John got some constructive feedback on a project that was pretty negative about their performance, and all of a sudden now John's been disengaged at that point. That's what you've noticed, and maybe the relationship with that project manager has now fallen to the wayside, or they haven't really heard from him much. Your job is to jump into a meeting and say, John, I was actually just thinking about this feedback that you got before. I want to say that I've seen some really significant improvements and really impressed by everything that you've done so far. I actually think this, I think if you're interested, I'd love for you to, take the lead on this other project that's coming up that's pretty high visibility. And so you're kind of like proactively taking accountability and then building forwards on that problem that potentially could have caused disengagement. Now, let's say you've done that. I'd say, and maybe you can't find something specific to provide recognition on or provide career development on. It's to sit down and have during your regular check-ins, if you have them. So if you're not having them, schedule them to make sure that you're not just checking in on work, that you're checking in on John. John, how's it going lately? John doesn't share anything specific. So you ask another question. What's new? And then doesn't share anything specific. And you go, John, I've noticed in the past couple of meetings, you haven't spoken up as much, and your expert opinion is really valued within the team. I wonder what you thought about this last meeting, and get them talking. Don't have to attack it yet. And to say, well, I'd really like you to share more of your opinions in those meetings because I think it's really valuable, and then see what happens. So kind of going after someone that's disengaged is not something that happens in one conversation. It's something that happens after multiple conversations, direct feedback, supportive conversations, and then to then see what happens and what changes. And then maybe in the next meeting, you talk about the impact that person is having in the company to focus on meeting itself. Maybe in a conversation, you find out that they have certain career development goals. Then you try to provide resources and support. And it might sound like a lot of work, but what you're doing is if someone's disengaged, the environment around that person is negative for some reason. Your job as a manager is to slowly and surely start making that environment positive. If tomorrow you change that environment to completely be positive, that person's still going to be disengaged. So moving from demotivated to motivated or disengaged to engaged is something that does take time. And so for yourself as a manager to say, I'm going to give this person 3 months. And this is, okay, big disclaimer, big asterisk. This person is still meeting their goals, but they're disengaged. If someone is not meeting their goals and not doing work, that is a direct constructive feedback conversation, generally through probably the formal performance management process that you eventually need to have. So we're talking about people that still are meeting their goals, but disengaged, we're not getting as much from them.
So I'm going to give you another wrinkle that you touched on, but we didn't get detail on it. You ask them, hey, what's going on? I've noticed you're not yourself. And they look at you, Mr. or Mrs. Business Owner, and say, you really upset me. You screwed up. I think what you did was wrong. As a business owner, how do you address that? I'll leave it there. How do you address that?
Mm-hmm. And so if possible, by the way, try to give specifics around how someone has changed instead of just someone has changed. Because if you just tell someone that they've changed, they're going to get defensive, or they might actually say nothing's wrong, and then you don't get anywhere. So what specific behaviors can you call out?
Dr. Benjamin, is that
when they go,
why are you so mad? I'm not mad. No, you seem mad. Why are you mad? I'm not mad. But you look like you're mad. Okay, now I'm mad. Quit asking me why I'm mad, right?
Yeah. Instead of you've been really silent during this entire meeting, and from what I read, what I can tell from your body position, it seems like you're maybe unhappy. How do you feel?
Right.
So if you're going to make an assumption, you have to tell someone that you're making an assumption, and then you have to call out specific body behaviors that you notice that are actually happening in front of you. It's like, John, you just slammed that door. Is that the wind? Or have you been working out? What's happening? So if someone, let's say you have that conversation and someone goes, yeah, like you really pissed me off. That was not okay. And you go, oh, I didn't actually realize that. You can say, I'm sorry for that. I didn't actually intend that. Or you can just say, I didn't realize that. That was a really tough decision for me to make. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened? Because I wasn't aware of that. And you can basically what you're doing is you're empathizing, you're getting curious, you're being transparent that you didn't really know that was something that happened, and you're exploring the conversation and you're listening. You're giving them a chance to share their thoughts and their feelings and their beliefs around something. You're not defending it. You don't have to say sorry, but sorry can go a long way from a leader if you want to share it. If your goal is to get that person more engaged and to support them. And if it's a decision that you really had to make, it's like, hey, by the way, I made the decision because of these reasons. I didn't mean to try to offend you. I value you very much as an employee. Is there something that I can explain more about this decision that would help? Or, what might we be able to do moving forwards? Because I want to make sure that you feel like you're part of those decisions and that you aren't dismissed. Actually, very often, a high-achieving employee tends to disengage because they feel like their opinions are not heard, when in actuality, a leader is just treating them like an equal. So you may actually end up facing this situation in the future.
Can you repeat that, please? What you just said about you feel like you're not being heard?
Yep. So very often, high achievers will end up closing down and shutting off and not sharing their ideas in future conversations because in a conversation, they don't feel like they were heard or that they feel like their opinion and their ideas were dismissed. When in reality, the leaders in the room were just treating them like an equal.
That's something. That is, I don't think, and most people don't recognize that or realize that from either side of that equation, which I think that's valuable. So being too familiar or welcoming someone in and treating them as an equal can backfire on you because they don't see that. There's no announcement made. It's not official. You don't know you're part of the club, but they think you are.
Yeah. An individual that is a lower seniority than you is often always aware, I'd say 99% of the time aware that they are a lower title and position than you. And so anytime that they feel like anytime they feel like they're not fully part of the conversation, they blame it on that hierarchy or that they're not good enough and they start doubting themselves or they're not respected. And so when someone does have an idea that is lower than you in title, and you even ask them for their ideas, your job is not to say, I don't think so. Your job is to say, really great idea. And ask one more question about it to get them to share a little bit more. And be like, okay, we're going to think about that. That's actually like something that we'll put in the back burner. Or great idea for this specific situation, we're probably going to go a different way because of this, and tell them and explain it to them because they don't have the same level of oversight that person does, to help them feel like they're included.
Yeah, and it's not that you love their idea that's important. That's not what drives them. It's that they felt like you heard their idea, even if you reject it, but you say exactly like you said, I get it. I understand where you're coming from. I don't think it's going to work this time, but let's talk about it later. Or we've tried it, it didn't work, but thanks for thinking of it. Whatever it is, it's validating to them or just signaling to them that I heard you. And I want to know a little more, and maybe I'll use it, maybe I won't. That's the thing. The thing isn't if you use the idea.
100%.
And the other, when you were talking about having that conversation with someone and they kind of clap back, you say, what's wrong? And they fire back at you. Could you maybe provide one or two coping skills a small business owner might be able to kind of loop in their head to stay calm and not be defensive? Because in my experience, staying calm and getting curious and being empathetic in those situations is hard. So how would you, are there a couple tips or tricks you might give someone out there that's going into one of these conversations and they're already uneasy with it or upset, but they have to stay calm?
Whew, okay. Well, of course,
whole other episode.
There's just the general, like, if you're already in an angry mood, you don't want to have this type of conversation. So part of this is also setting. You don't want to feel rushed. You don't want to feel like you have to run to another meeting, and you don't want to be frustrated. So when you're having these types of conversations, you have to make sure that you're in the right place.
In between meetings and say, look, I got 5 minutes. Come on in here. Let's talk.
Yes, not at all. I was working with a leader actually probably a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about a difficult conversation they were having with someone. and how the person brought it up kind of near the end of the 101. And they cut off the conversation and they said, well, we'll talk about this 2 weeks from now in our next 101. And that's at least they had a date for another conversation, but the worst thing they could have done is kind of cut off that conversation. You can be late to one meeting to solve a human issue between an individual. And I would highly recommend that all leaders do that. Okay, so some strategies other than like a very deep exhalation, because the longer that you exhale in comparison to your inhale, the more that you kind of move into that relaxation mode from fight or flight. Breathing is just a whole nother thing. It works. It's simple. It's difficult to remember. But in terms of conversational strategies, a very simple thing to do is to mirror back what they have said to you to show that you understand, and then to ask them a follow-up question. And do that as many times as you need till you can respond in a non-defensive manner. So you say, okay, what I'm hearing is last week during the meeting, you felt like I kind of dismissed your idea. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about about that? Because I just want to remember. Or I remember about what I'm hearing is last week you felt kind of that I dismissed your idea. Can you tell me? Can you share a little bit more about that situation with me? Or can you share a little bit more about how you felt then? Or can you share a little bit more about what you thought about my actions? And just asking for more until you can come up with a question around, more so around, you can say, oh, so what I'm hearing is you felt like I dismissed your idea. Until you can kind of provide some sort of recognition for that person to say, like, oh, I can see how you felt that way. So then now I feel like I can move from defensiveness to empathy to empathizing. Oh, I totally understand how you felt that way, and that wasn't my intent. So then you're taking ownership for the situation overall. So until you kind of ask those questions, until you can empathize and take ownership in some way, shape, or form, and then you want to then try to move towards, well, what are you going to do next about it? So I totally can see how you might have felt that way, and I apologize for that. I actually really appreciated your idea, and I really want to hear more of them moving forwards in the future. So what would help you feel like I heard you when you shared something in a group? Because I did, and I was actually really impressed by what you shared, and I want that to keep happening.
So I heard, I think 3 things, maybe 4. Number 1, make sure you have time. Don't rush it. Number 2, do some breathing before the meeting. Focus on exhale, not inhale. Number 3, mirror and ask questions. And the purpose of the mirroring and questions is to make sure they understand, you understand why they're upset. The more you mirror back and ask questions, you're breaking down those walls, and they're really going back to an earlier point, they're really feeling heard. And they're saying, okay, he's hearing me. He understands where I'm coming from. He's trying to understand. And then it's when you finally make the point where they go, yes, that's it. That's when you've got them, meaning you understand, or they believe you understand why they were upset. Then number 4, go into, okay, didn't mean to do that. Actually, I want more of that from you, or whatever it is. Help me do it better. Help next time. Help me do it better for you, because I don't want you to feel this way again. Is that an accurate summary?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. And just to put another cap on it, if someone is disengaged, generally it's because you have hurt their trust in some way.
Yeah.
And so when you're dealing with the situation, your goal is to repair that trust. And so how do you repair trust to someone? You give them space. You let them know that their feelings are okay. And you let them know, you help them realize that you do understand, and that you are going to try to do something different in the future based on what they'd prefer. And that's basically what you would be doing. And as a leader, it can be very difficult, because most of the time you want to say, be quiet, do your job. That's not what I meant.
Yeah, and even beyond that, be quiet, do your job. It's be quiet, do your job, because I have so much shit I need to get done. And if you could just lock that part down over there so I don't have to worry about it, it would mean the world to me. And so neither, it's one of those situations where, and I want to preface this, I don't believe, and I don't think you believe, leaders or business owners go out there to personally demotivate people and make them feel bad about their work. They're hardworking people themselves, and they're kind of fighting and struggling to find their way at times as well. And so I understand none of this would be malicious. The other side of this is what you're detailing and what you're asking them to do isn't easy either. It's a real conscious thing, but the investment in the emotional and the time investment and the emotional currency it would cost a business owner to do this with a valued, high producing, important employee, the ROI is worth it, or at least to get to a point where you know what decisions, what do we need to do now? Are you staying? Are you coming back here? Am I going to get what the old version of you or the version of you I'm used to, or do we need to part ways? Is it irreconcilable differences? But it's important to get there versus like pushing that out and waiting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, and if we have any employees that are disengaged listening to this, I hope you also understand that this is a very large ask from your leader. You're basically saying, here's this unknown, actually kind of scary, uncomfortable situation that I'm going to now demand that my leader fix. Well, as a disengaged employee, I hope you also understand that you're continuing the problem.
Yeah.
And that you have the choice to show up to work and be proud of your work, or to fix the situation, or try to manage up. And it does go both ways, but right now we're just talking to those leaders. But I hope if you're a disengaged employee and listening to this, or disengaged leader, that you also maybe do this for help your manager out.
It's one of the hardest things a small business owner. It's one of the hardest leadership techniques to master, to be good at. It's hard work. This is hard. We're talking about hard slugging here today, and I appreciate you doing that, Dr. Benjamin. I enjoy calling you Dr. Benjamin more than Ben. So, but I've enjoyed it. I think it's been super valuable. So if anyone is out there thinking, man, I would love to talk to Ben and pick his brain and learn more about this or his work or his book, how can we get in touch with you?
Just go to liveforyourselfconsulting.com. All the links are there. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Dr. Benjamin Ritter. Let me know that you heard me on this show. And let me know that you left a review for this show, even better, because then you'll get even more of my time, because I'll be really thankful for you going out there and taking a moment to leave a positive review.
And Matt, do you have the link to the page on his website with the book, Becoming Fearless, available on Amazon too? Just make sure when you search that, there's a couple similar titles. Just make sure the author is Dr. Benjamin Ritter. If you want to pick up that book, man, thanks so much for your time. This is good. We could have talked for a lot longer. It was great information and definitely useful. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. All right, there you go, Dr. Benjamin Ritter. Hope you guys got some value out of that conversation. He's a smart guy. Thank you for tuning into the KeyHire Small Business Podcast. If you got value out of today's episode and want to keep up to date on our new content, make sure you leave a comment and let us know what you think of the episode, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you prefer to listen to your podcast, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, whatever your favorite platform is, by searching up the KeyHire Small Business Podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about working with KeyHire and how we can help your small business, you can schedule a meeting on our website. We're a help first organization, so we guarantee no selling, no weirdness. We're just there to help if we can. Thanks for listening. I'm Corey Harlock, and until next time, stop grinding and start growing.